May I come in, sir? Good morning, sirs.
Good morning. Please have your seat.
Thank you, sir.
So, Vidushi,
Yes.
comfortable?
Yes.
Should we start?
Yes.
Vidushi, introduce yourself to the panel.
A very warm good morning. Good afternoon. I'm Vidushi Singh. I'm 21 years old. I come from a very quaint, beautiful town of Faizabad, which is now known as Ayodhya. I completed my schooling from Faizabad, and while growing up, I took a keen interest in international affairs and economics. And post my schooling, I joined Sri Ram College of Commerce and completed my BA Honours in Economics in the year 2021. And post that, I've been preparing for the Civil Services exam.
So, Vidushi, you were born in Jodhpur
Yes, sir.
and brought up in Faizabad.
Yes, sir.
All right. So, tell us more about Faizabad, the special features of Faizabad.
So Faizabad was the first capital of Awadh state, and it was founded by Nawab Sadat Khan, the first Nawab of Awadh. And overall, it had a very, historically, it was a part of Saket, Ayodhya. And of course, the historical connotations to it, it has been a religious hub for not just the Nawabi culture, but also the Ramayana, the Jain traditions. Rishabh Dev was born there. And apart from that, Faizabad as a place, it has been really a representative of the Indian culture, which shows how different communities mingle with one another and overall demonstrates the Indian way of life.
So, what about change of name? It remains as Faizabad?
So, it has been changed to Ayodhya now. However, the residents of Faizabad now call it Faizabad itself. So
you
both
are
the names
from
are
the
used.
holy town of Ayodhya.
Yes.
Vidushi, Uttar Pradesh had recently held Investor Summit.
Yes.
So, can you tell us more how UP has benefited out of this summit?
So, the Global Investor Summit was a huge success for Uttar Pradesh. Overall, investments worth 33 lakh crores and MOUs worth 33 lakh crores were signed. And overall, if you see the sectoral distribution, it has been very diverse in nature. There has been investments in green technology, industrial parks, and overall infrastructural development in Uttar Pradesh. And this has also been highlighted in the overall Uttar Pradesh budget of 2023-24, which lays overemphasis on infrastructural development and, of course, reaching the last mile, which ensures that women-led development and also the local issues of Uttar Pradesh are also tackled.
All right. Vidushi, we have seen collapse of banks in US and Switzerland.
Yes.
RBI is again planning to talk of repo rates increase. So, do you see any similarity in the steps being taken by India? And do you foresee similar situation in India also as an economist?
So, as an economist, I don't see that happening in the near future in India, primarily because of the structural reforms that the Indian government has taken over the years. And of course, the increase in authority of RBI and oversight over the entire banking sector in India with the insolvency bankruptcy code coming in. And of course, the overall ease of doing business, the credit expansion, the credit growth in India, especially in the past 2 years, post-COVID pandemic has been very robust. And apart from that, also we've seen certain formalization happening as the economic survey has pointed out. So by and large, I see that Indian economy has been very resilient in the pandemic after even in the aftermath of the Russia-Ukraine war. And also currently with the global headwinds heading towards an economic contagion of sorts, as we saw recently in the past month, I don't see that India will succumb to the overall global pressure.
But World Bank has cut down India's.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So that was primarily because of monetary tightening happening and the overall inflation growth trade-off that is taking place in the world currently.
Vidushi, I find IFS is your first choice.
Yes.
So let's talk about foreign affairs. How you think Africa is important to India, and what India is doing to promote its relations with African countries?
So first and foremost, Africa and India both are part of the global south, and India is vouching for heading the global south and being the voice of it. So one is that. And secondly, Africa is a huge market for India and a very diverse market of sorts. With the recent rise in defense exports in India, we see a very new sectors opening up, and Africa can be a very fruitful partner in that. And also apart from that, the ties with African countries, for example, the recent cheetah reintroduction happening it already happened last year with Namibia, and of course we're in talks with South Africa as well. So there's an overall very huge shift towards focusing on Africa and of course utilizing our soft power with them.
Do you think diplomacy alone can stop a war, or there are some other factors that will help stop a war between two countries?
So diplomacy alone, I don't think it's sufficient. Of course, diplomacy can actually ensure that there are certain pressures that can be built upon the parties involved in war. So I think that is diplomacy can be the means. However, there are certain other measures involved to actually.
Can you name, for instance, one or two other factors that will help stopping a war?
So, for example, the economic sanctions
Yes.
that was recent. Yes, sir. So, apart from that, I think overall diplomacy. Apart from that, if we look at, so actually nothing else comes to my mind. Economic
Think
warfare.
of military strength.
Yes, sir. But for a third party which is not directly involved in war, it would actually not want to venture into that particular territory. So, I think diplomacy should be the
So
way.
Vidushi, from your DEF, I find you were part of number of school festival, college festivals. So tell me about one of these, Leher.
Yes.
What is this project Leher that find mention in more than one place?
Yes, sir. So in college, I was a part of society called Enactus Sri Ram College of Commerce. Enactus is a global not-for-profit organization and a CSR initiative of Walmart and KPMG. And it has chapters all across the globe, and more than 70,000 students are associated with it globally. And I was a part of the Sri Ram College of Commerce chapter. And in my second year, we were actually looking out for a new social business model to build a new social business model. And we found one very interesting concept regarding a very unknown waste called the cigarette butt. So Project Leher is an initiative which looks at maintaining a total supply chain of cigarette waste, purifying them, and there's a component called cellulose acetate in the cigarette filter. So that has plastic-like properties. So if we purify that waste and use that in various products, we can make viable products out of it. So this Project Leher was an initiative wherein we actually partnered with.
Is it sustainable?
So actually in my year, we founded the model and then our juniors took it up, and currently it is running very successfully, and our products currently are in the pottery sector. So if we actually mix terracotta and cellulose acetate, it increases the durability of the product. And also we created a concept of circular economy wherein a cigarette is actually converted into an ashtray. So this was a very viable. Thank you, sir.
Vidushi,
Yes.
do you think the Western media is less generous towards India, or it states the facts?
So I think Western media in general, it has certain reservations against India. For example, the overall international indices that have been coming in, and India has not been ranking well on them. And it is primarily because overall the difference of culture between the two. Indian atmosphere and environment is starkly different from the Western parameters, and that in a way sort of makes their perspective look like biased because they assess our performance on their own parameters.
Do you think those Western indices you're talking about,
Yes.
do you corroborate them?
So not in all of them. For example, the very contentious Global Hunger Index, we can actually see the development that India has been making through our NFHS surveys, and also the overall PM Poshan and schemes. that
Okay,
have been coming in.
Vidushi, do you think these Western countries, they have a very bad habit of lecturing other countries on democracy, humanity, human values, social values, cultural pluralism. Don't you think so?
So this has also been mentioned by our Honorable External Affairs Minister recently. And I do agree to it to a certain extent, primarily because the ideals of American Revolution and French Revolution, which are Western ideals, they are the founding bed of the modern democracy. So I think that is why they actually do things like that. But however, as I mentioned in my previous answer as well, I think the difference of cultures is something that should be accommodated.
So the traits of democracy as envisaged in French Revolution or this, what you are talking about, are those traits are the traits of Indian democracy.
Yes.
Which do you think is have a superior quality?
So I think we cannot call neither of them superior because in respective countries they have been very successful. France is also a very robust democracy, and of course Indian democracy, as we all know, it has been very resilient over the years. And in the cultural context, I think Indian ideals, for example, the Indian concept of secularism, which is very different from the Western idea, that accommodates our perspective, our diversity, and also strengthens our democratic institutions. So,
taking a cue from Chairman's question on Africa.
yes.
So now India considers Africa, entire African continent, as a very fertile ground for its Atmanirbhar push as far as defense sector is concerned.
Yes.
Now can you tell me, can you answer that question, what Honorable Chairman Sir has asked you?
Sorry, sir. Question.
Question is, India considers the African continent as a very fertile ground
Yes.
for pushing the Atmanirbhar Bharat as far as the defense sector is concerned.
Yes.
Now tell me.
So very recently, of course, India has had a very high defense exports, more than rupees 15,000 crores very recently, which has been at a 10-year high. And of course, Africa has been one very prospective market for us with respect to artillery guns and of course the other equipments that Indian defense sector has been making.
There was a meeting in Pune
Yes.
on 28th March between African people and these African chief of army staffs and Indian people. Are you aware of that meeting?
Sorry,
or you are
sir.
not aware of
Yes,
that? Vidushi, my last question is about this China issue. The European countries, despite a type of opposition from America, they are making a beeline to China. Say now, French president is there
Yes.
in China. I think German chancellor was also there, or I don't know whether they had a talk or something, but they are quite getting cozy to China.
Yes.
Why it is so?
So,
Despite the American opposition.
so first and foremost, because China has an indispensable part in the global supply chain, and the entire world actually depends on it with respect to raw material supply of critical minerals in particular. So that is one strategic interest of various developed countries as well. And also secondly, because China...
Anything relating to oil sector, anything relating to energy sector to
Yes.
Europe?
So, China currently holds 75% of lithium processing globally. And lithium, as we all know it, is very important for the electrical vehicle manufacturing globally. So, one is that, and of course, the overall China's role in with respect to processing and refinery. I'm not very sure of the exact details. I think it has to do with that. And also secondly, because China has had recently mentioned that there is no limit to ties with Russia. So probably there can be some diplomatic effort on part of China.
Okay. Vidushi, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Vidushi, China's policy towards us, it appears from the past experience, is to create somehow nuisance and make incremental demand and then agree for something very little. Over a period of time, they make large claim and then, but we don't seem to have a proper policy towards China. Our strategy seems to be evolving one, whereas theirs is a designed plan.
Yes.
What do you have to say on this?
So I actually read a book by a very senior diplomat, Vijay Gokhale, on this. And he actually mentions that China possibly makes such bargains primarily because it has a very flexible foreign policy. So it actually makes, but whenever we anticipate that China would react in our envisioned manner, it actually surprises us and goes the other way. And this is because, and this has been happening ever since the Sino-Indian War of 1962. And of course, we really need more focus on China for that. And as has been mentioned by Vijay Gokhale as well, it is very important to strengthen our efforts with respect to China and diplomacy with them.
What could be the motive of renaming about 10 or 11 places in Arunachal Pradesh? It seems to be a part of their larger game plan.
Yes, sir. So I believe that one very important aspect to why China has been doing so is that it primarily wants to bring in nationalist elements in its domestic politics as well. So by periodically involving India in some skirmish at the border or renaming places of Arunachal Pradesh to get in a diplomatic standoff, it is primarily trying to instigate the nationalistic values of its own. So I think that is one of the reasons.
Vidushi, a Rajasthan right to health bill now, a solution seems to be emerging.
Yes.
But whether the bargain is a bad bargain in order to calm down the situation.
Yes. So recently it has been argued that the private hospitals will not be under the ambit of the right to health bill, and this essentially takes the 98% of private hospitals of Rajasthan outside the ambit of the bill. And of course, the bargain has cost a lot, because the envisioned idea was that there's an affordable emergency healthcare for all the people. And of course, I think there needs to be further negotiations on this on part of the industry leaders of private hospitals and the government, so that the ambiguity of the act, for example, what exactly is emergency provisions and how will they get compensated by the government, these things need to be defined in a more literate manner. And of course, I think that can be more fruitful in the future.
Few months back, we heard a term called twin deficit. What is the meaning of this term?
Oh, sorry, so I'm not aware.
There is something called shrinkflation. The companies are resorting and befooling the customer. What is shrinkflation? How it affects?
So I'm not exactly aware of the term. However, I think it has to do with inflating certain prices of their. So I will read upon it.
Keeping the price intact, but reducing the quantity.
Yes, sir.
Keeping the price intact. See, Maggie does it very often.
Yes, sir. Yes. So even Colgate has a very successful story about it.
Yeah. What is the role of independent directors in corporate?
So corporate governance, as per Companies Act 2013, it actually involves appointing independent directors in a company so that transparency is ensured. However, there have been certain loopholes with respect to its implementation. The appointment is not as transparent as envisioned. And of course, there are certain vested interests often involved. So there needs to be a very stringent guidelines in place so that this provision of the act can be made more stringent.
Vidushi, I'm not talking about any individual case. Defamation, criminal defamation especially, seems to be outdated and archaic. Time has come to undo this legislation. What is your view?
So I agree to whatever you said primarily, because I think under Article 19 there are reasonable restrictions to freedom of speech. However, criminal defamation is one particular aspect which has been termed as archaic, and people should actually have the right to say, and of course the civil punishments involving defamation should be looked after, and criminal defamation is something that I don't corroborate with.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Vidushi, are you aware of some recent findings by an eminent economist of India on the status of poverty post-COVID?
Yes, sir. So very recently, former Niti Aayog chairman Arvind Pangadia, he came out with a study wherein he, using PLFS data, he mentioned that both rural poverty as well as urban poverty have been on a decline, contrary to the major findings of previous studies by Azim.
What was the reason cited by him? What could be the reason for that?
So, on part of rural poverty, he mentions that the umbrella schemes provided by the government with respect to free allocations under NFSA and Manrega support, all of these have actually cushioned the overall rural sector of India, which has, after a period of slight increase of poverty in the lockdown phase, this led to reduction in poverty over time. And on part of urban poverty as well, structural measures with respect to MSMEs have been helpful.
You also mentioned about the circular economy in one of
Yes.
your answers. Now, where do we see circular economy very prominently? Which sector of economy we see circular economy is happening?
I'm not very sure, but I believe waste sector is one such sector wherein circular economy has been very prominent. For example, the ethanol blending program is one aspect of it. I think I have to read more about circular economy.
Now, India currently is at 3.2 US dollar trillion US dollar economy approximately,
Yes.
and aspires to become 5 trillion in a period of 4 years from now.
Yes.
Okay, by 2027. So, do you think it is possible, looking at the present rate of growth of in the range of 6 to 7%?
So I believe it is primarily because the overall policy framework that the government of India has adopted, it corroborates to the multiplier effect in place. Working on the supply side and building in infrastructure and laying the superstructure of the economy, it will further lead to a multiplier effect. However, on part of global headwinds, as you mentioned, I think those really restrict the prospects of Indian economy. But for that, it's very important to increase the consumer sentiment and, of course, increase the government expenditure to compensate for that.
Now, Vidushi, G20 is essentially an economic forum.
Yes.
Do you think this Russia-Ukraine war, which is basically a geopolitical issue, that it should be included in the deliberations of G20 and rather derailing its deliberations, and the consensus has not been achieved during finance ministers conference of G20 and foreign ministers? So can we take out this G20 from G20 deliberation, this Russia-Ukraine war?
So very recently, the G20 Sherpa of India, Amitabh Kant, he actually argued that we actually need to separate politics for fruitful discussions to take place. However, I think completely isolating Russia-Ukraine war will not be possible, primarily because of the economic repercussions of the war. It has brought in high inflation rate overall in the global economy. And of course, the economic aspect of it cannot be completely isolated.
Now, Vidushi, are you aligned with the comments of Government of India, views of Government of India? It has submitted to Honorable Supreme Court with regard to same-sex marriage, or you have some different views?
So I hold different views than the Government of India.
So what are your views, and what is the logic of your views?
So the logic is following the judgments by the Honorable Supreme Court, the Navtej Singh Johar case, the Deepika Singh case, and of course the Puttaswamy judgment. And also the Supreme Court mentioned in the Puttaswamy judgment one very important line, that the Indian democracy is founded on constitutional values rather than the public morality. So keeping in touch with the modern values and constitutional values, I think same-sex marriage has certain, it should be legalized primarily because there are certain rights which are not being meted out to the people, and they are in need of it. And also in the Navtej Singh Johar case, Article 14 and 15, Supreme Court has mentioned that the term sex actually refers to sexual orientation as well. So following all these logics, I think I would corroborate to the
So
overall.
do you think that Supreme Court is the right body to take this decision, which has got so much of social connotation, social perspective?
So considering that the fundamental rights are in breach, and under Article 32 of Indian Constitution, the Supreme Court has the power of judicial review when the fundamental rights are not in consonance. So I think, and of course globally as well, out of 32 countries that have legalized same-sex marriage, 10 have opted for the judiciary. So following all these data in place, I think.
Right. Thank you, Vidushi.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you, sir. So, Vidushi, I would like to know, why do you wish to join civil services?
Yes, sir. So coming from a small town, I realized the value of good administration at a very young age. And of course, growing up, my interests diversified. I took keen interest in international affairs, economics. And by and large, the value that, and of course, the job that civil services offers, the opportunity of diversity, the leadership roles at the young age, and of course, the ability to make impact, I think all of these really made me make my resolve to sit for this exam and go for civil service.
But I see, Vidushi, that you are an economics graduate and your optional is also economics.
Yes.
So don't you think you are better fit for Indian economic services?
So I don't think I can comment upon that primarily because of course if I complete my masters I can sit for that exam as well. But sitting for this exam right after my graduation was a decision that I took primarily because I realized that a gap year after my masters probably won't look as good as a gap year after my undergraduate.
Okay. And your first choice is Indian Foreign Service.
Yes.
So if you were to be EAM or Foreign Ambassador of India,
Yes.
what 3 things would you like to promote about India?
So first and foremost, I think one very important aspect is the Indian cuisine, which already finds a very solid footprint in the global world order. Yes, sir. So secondly, about the Indian way of life, because currently Western ideals are proliferating very fast, and of course Indian values of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam need an aggressive portrayal. And lastly, I think apart from that, I would also like to focus upon Indian secularism as well, how diversity has been a very important part of our Indian society. So these 3 aspects.
If there is a war between India and China, whose side will Russia take?
So India and China. So it's a very difficult situation for Russia. However, going by the Chinese commitments towards Russia, I think that it would actually opt for China if it is actually pressurized to do so. However, seeing that how India has dabbled with Russia and Ukraine, it might also take a neutral stance.
Okay. Coming to your optional economics,
Yes.
in emerging countries like India, capital expenditure is necessary,
Yes.
but it impacts the fiscal discipline of a country.
Yes.
So how do you see that?
So one very important concept is the concept of crowding in. Capital expenditure, which actually promotes private investment and which has been the focus of the Indian government, that is very important. So fiscal discipline in a way, in the long run, capital expenditure of this magnanimous amount, it's actually justified in the longer run. And also secondly, I think it is also enhancing the capabilities of a country by working on not just the physical infrastructure, but also the social infrastructure.
Coming to climate change, developed countries are pressurizing developing countries. Okay, so should countries be sued for climate change?
So very recently, a small Pacific island, Vanuatu, it actually argued to ICJ if this provision can actually be used. However, I think climate change is one aspect that requires unanimous collaboration among countries. So going for a top-down approach and a negative approach by suing another country would possibly not be very fruitful in our race towards climate net zero commitments.
Okay. So Vidushi, I was listening to your views about same-sex marriage.
Yes.
So I would like to know your views about live-in relationships in India.
Yes, sir. So I think they are very much justified, live-in relationships. However, I think, of course, the social acceptance is one particular aspect that hinders it, and also recently there have been very criminal cases coming in with respect to live-in relationships. So I think there's a need for an overall behavioral change and value education in India so that partners are seen as equals. So this is
What about the rights of women and in case of children's their inheritance and laws related to those?
So I think marriage is one particular institution in place that actually legalizes everything. However, if 2 people willingly want to live in a relationship which does not really undergo the sanctions of marriage, I think it is completely up to their choice.
Okay. In your DAF, you have mentioned social entrepreneurship.
Yes.
Right. So I would like to you comment on this statement. Government has no business to be in business.
So I don't subscribe to that view primarily because we've also studied this in development economics. There's a fine balance between command and control economy and market-based initiatives in an economy. So for any successful entrepreneurship to take place, it's really important to have very strict regulations in place for actual contract enforcement and of course legality of the overall enterprise in a country.
You mentioned about India's cuisine.
Yes.
And you also have a hobby of making different cuisines.
Yes.
So tell me, in most of the restaurants, if we see across India, the cooks are generally male.
Yes.
And generally cooking is associated with female in India, generally.
Yes.
But there are no female cooks in most of the restaurants. Why so?
So it has to do with the exposure that the hotel industry requires. a lot of females who are generally cooks at home, they do not get the exposure and of course the opportunity to avail such high level jobs of chefs. And this is something that actually should be promoted further. And of course, the newer concepts of Indian cuisine, something on lines of millets being promoted, which is a knowledge that women currently hold. So there are several opportunities for women to seize. And of course, government should make efforts to actually provide and facilitate in doing so.
So my last question again, coming back to economics, most of the women in India are engaged in cooking and providing services,
Yes.
but they are not recognized in terms of GDP
Yes.
or in terms of monetary value, but they are providing tremendous service. So how can we include those services under GDP?
So care economy, as you mentioned, it actually amounts to up to 3% of our GDP. And of course, the care economy by itself, it is, if we actually objectively look at it, it's the foundation of whatever is happening in an economy. So it's important to actually corroborate. One particular thing that can be done is the idea of universal basic income, or providing paid work for household chores. Apart from, but I don't think that these can fructify in the near future. So primarily involving certain additional data points towards it. And of course, I think the overall statistics would need an overhaul primarily to account for the care economy.
Okay, thank you, Vidushi. I pass on to Chairman, sir.
So, Vidushi, 2 quick questions.
Yes, sir.
Who was a mathematician who won the Nobel Prize in Economics?
So John Nash.
And for which topic?
So for his contributions in game theory.
All right. What is difference between Pokhran 1 and Pokhran 2?
So Pokhran 1 was the Operation Smiling Buddha, and it was essentially to demonstrate our nuclear capabilities. And Pokhran 2 was actually it actually materialized into our demonstration. I'm forgetting the actual differences between the two. I will read into it.
All right. Last question. What kind of administrator you want to be? Administrator with human touch or administrator with iron fist? And why?
So I would want to be the former, administrator with human touch, primarily because I think as an administrator, it's very important for the administrator to be relatable to the people. And if a human touch is actually taken, if it is actually implemented very well, it can further lead to knowing the grievances of the society very well and working upon it. So I think that would be, and of course the empathy that comes along with it.
All right. So, Vidushi, we have covered all the questions that we wanted to ask. So, anything you think is left out? So, I can ask you one last question.
Yes. So I think a lot of portions were covered. It was a very nice experience. So thank you.
All right. So, Vidushi, you can wait outside. We'll call you.
Thank you, sir. Thank
Come, Vidushi. Have a seat. आपका नाम किसने रखा था?
So both my parents actually liked the name very much.
Hmm?
Yes, sir.
Your mother?
Yes, sir. I think it was a unanimous decision. I don't know who proposed the name.
Chalo, Vidushi, how you think you have fared today?
So I think one particular thing, the shrinkflation was a very obvious concept that I should have known about. However, I think the questions by themselves, they were very diverse in nature, and I really enjoyed the experience. Rest, I would love to hear the feedback.
And your own assessment of your performance?
So
Areas that you think you need to work on?
So I think one particular thing is the international affairs aspect. I think I need to follow that very well because I didn't know about the defense meeting that sir was asking about in particular. And apart from that, I think I need to brush up on basic concepts of economics for a better delivery of answers.
So, Vidushi, you are very good.
Thank you, sir.
Very good. And almost all the questions that we asked, you were good. There are areas where you need to work on.
Yes.
All right. So, number one, you were serious. Don't look so serious. Just enjoy the conversation. Enjoy it. Yes. Don't look so serious, and you are knowledgeable.
Yes.
But knowledge also means that you should know when to stop,
Yes.
That is number one. And you should know what to attempt and what not to attempt. All right. If you, for example, Pokhran 2, you were not able to exactly tell me.
Yes.
So you could have said that, sir, I only know about Pokhran 1.
Yes.
There is something called nuclear power for peaceful purposes, and there is something called nuclear power for strength.
Yes.
So look into the difference between the two. Then rest all you were good. We'll hear from other members.
Yes.
Nobel Prize, governance, first class. Good. Nothing more to it.
Vidushi, you are an excellent candidate.
Thank you, sir.
You have done very well. Regarding international affairs, please have some updation on your current affairs section.
Yes.
You need to update there, okay?
Yes.
Africa in a nutshell, if I say, because generally in Africa, these Russian people, they send a lot of military equipment, but now they themselves are busy. Their manufacturers are supplying to Russia itself.
Yes.
So they don't have. So Africa is an open ground now. So India tries to capture the market in Africa for defense things. So there was a meeting, etc. You read all these things. So that is there. And Middle East, Southeast. Middle East, Southeast, Taiwan, okay?
Yes.
And Russia, Ukraine war is a very common thing now. So these are the areas where you need to focus on for international things, right?
Yes.
And especially the bad relationship between America and Europe, America and Saudi Arabia are not bad, but deteriorating type of relationships.
Yes.
Okay, so you have to have some analytical things on those things.
Yes.
You will do well. I'm convinced that you will do well there, but you have to have a reading on this,
Yes.
so that you can analyze. You are an excellent candidate. All the best.
विदुषी बहुत बेहतरीन, बहुत बढ़िया परफॉर्मेंस रहा आपका। आपने क्या वो 2 क्वेश्चन ना आंसर करना या ये सब कोई ज़्यादा मैटर नहीं करता, बट आपने क्या गलत किया है 2 जगह मेरे को जो प्रोमिनेंट लगा। एक, जब साहब ने सवाल आपसे पूछा कि इज इट द ड्यूटी ऑफ गवर्नमेंट टू बी इन द बिजनेस ऑफ गवर्नमेंट,
Yes.
तो आपने क्या कहा, आई डोंट थिंक सो। आप फॉरेन इंडियन फॉरेन सर्विस में जाना चाहते हैं, हाउ कैन यू स्टार्ट विद अ नेगेटिव आंसर? इधर इवन इफ यू डोंट एग्री, यू contextualize it. There are sectors in which, yes, majority of the sectors the government has no business to be in the business,
Yes.
but in critical sectors they can be, but there are ways to answer it.
Yes.
आपने तुरंत क्या कहा? आपने क्या कहा? I don't think so.
Yes, sir.
It is a tagline of government. गवर्नमेंट खुद कह रही है, प्रधानमंत्री कह रहा है आपका, आप कहते हो आप मानते नहीं।
Yes. sir.
देयर आर बेटर वेज। वर्ड का बहुत है ना, कैसे शुरू करते हो। आपका क्या मत था कि क्रिटिकल सेक्टर्स में होना चाहिए?
Yes, sir.
पहले आप मेन चीज पे तो एग्री करो। क्रिटिकल सेक्टर तो बहुत कम है, फ्रिंज एलिमेंट तो बहुत कम है, मेन बिजनेस है, उस धंधे में नहीं होना चाहिए सरकार को, वो तो सरकार ही कहती है। फिर क्या, विदुषी का भी यही मत होना चाहिए। और दूसरी जगह जो आपको अगर पोखरण 2 आता नहीं था, पहले ही मना कर देते थे कि आई कैन ओनली आंसर द फर्स्ट
So,
पार्ट।
I think I could recall. I mean, I was able to recall Pokhran
Alright.
1, but Pokhran 2 just
That could have
slipped
been
my mind.
a better answer to that question. You could
Yes,
have phrased
yes,
it
sir.
better.
Yes.
I think you will agree to it.
Yes.
All the best, do well. We hope that you make us proud.
Thank you, sir.
I think Vidushi, nothing more to add. All points have been covered. Just work on suggestions given by Honorable Chairman and the Honorable members. Okay, right? All the best.
Thank you, sir.
So, Vidushi, you were very good in all the aspects of personality, communication and content. जहाँ पे ये 2 जगह जिसे गलती हुई है, छोटी सी हो जाती है, तो उसका एक तरीका क्या है, टेक अ पॉज ऑफ 3-4 सेकेंड्स।
Yes.
आप क्या है, आप क्वेश्चन सुनते ही ना एकदम से आंसर देने लग रहे हो, है ना। आता हो तो अच्छी बात है, नहीं भी आता हो ना तो भी आप एकदम से दे रहे हो, तो थोड़ा सा एक थिंकिंग पर्सनैलिटी सामने आएगी। ठीक है। उसके बाद एक वाई सिविल सर्विसेज में आपने बोला, सिंस आई कम फ्रॉम अ स्मॉल टाउन, आप जहाँ से आते हो ना, यू शुड बी प्राउड ऑफ दैट प्लेस। तो ये वर्ड्स आपको नहीं बोलने चाहिए, स्मॉल टाउन, ये विलेज, है ना, बिल्कुल भी नहीं बोलने।
ये सिंपैथी फैक्टर लगते हैं।
हाँ,
डोंट टेक सिंपैथी।
सिंपैथी लेना चाहते हो क्या? नहीं, ये सिग्नल जा रहा है, सो अवॉइड दिस फ्रेज। उसके बाद आपने कहा, इट इज़ अ वेरी गुड जॉब। Even our Prime Minister has said civil service is not a job, it's a service.
Yes.
है ना, तो आप पब्लिक सर्विस में है, जॉब में नहीं है, तो आप इसके लिए जॉब का टर्म अवॉइड करेंगे यूज करने का, ठीक है. जस्ट फॉर करेक्शन, मतलब आई कैन सी यू स्कोरिंग वेरी इजीली 200 प्लस मार्क्स इन द इंटरव्यू, वेरी इजीली, है ना. और जब भी आपका अगर दूसरा स्टैंड होगा ना जिसमें आप एग्री नहीं करते हैं, तो उसमें ऐसे मत बोलिए आई डू नॉट एग्री या डिसएग्री, आप बोलिए सर इन माय ओपिनियन और सर आई थिंक सो. थोड़ा सा एक अलग पर्सनालिटी एस्पेक्ट सामने आएगा.
डिप्लोमेट की भाषा होती है.
और आप तो आईएफएस बनना चाह रहे हो, तो भाषा तो आप ब्लंट यूज नहीं कर सकते हो थोड़ा सा, है ना. ये सब चीजें करेंगे आप, डेफिनेटली 200 प्लस मार्क्स स्कोर करेंगे, बिकॉज यू हैव ऑल द ट्रेट्स ऑफ गुड आईएफएस ऑफिसर.
सो विदुषी, आपका नाम मैंने इसीलिए पूछा था कि अपने नाम को सार्थक करना है आपको. ठीक है, वी हैव गिवन यू 70%,
193 marks.
193, और आपका पोटेंशियल 200 से ऊपर लेने का. हाउ हैव यू डन योर रिटन?
So, according to me, I think I've performed up to the best of my abilities, but I think we'll have to see. Actually,
So
how it happens.
we even wish to see you on top of the list. All right, you are capable, you are young, you are knowledgeable, you have all the traits. I can see future civil servant sitting here. That is the kind of aura you have generated. But don't let your preparations slow down in any way.
Yes.
All right, work hard till the last day. Never assume that it will happen.
Yes.
वर्क हार्ड, अपने ऊपर विश्वास रखिए, कमी नहीं आने देना.
Yes.
और ये 70% आपकी अचीवमेंट से थोड़ा सा कम है, जो आप अगर ये गलतियां नहीं की होती यू वुड हैव गॉट मोर.
Yes.
Any question you like to ask?
Yes, sir. So one that I was told in my first mock that I actually spoke for too long. So I wanted to know if my answers were lengthy in any way.
Your answer in some cases were lengthy.
Okay.
In some cases were lengthy, like UP Investor Summit.
Yes.
You were very long.
Okay.
Faizabad, I asked you why not Ayodhya.
एक वो स्टार्टिंग में हॉबी पे आप काफी लॉन्ग चले गए थे. स्टार्टिंग में कुछ हॉबी पे पूछा था सर ने.
हाँ, फिर मैंने
याद नहीं
आपसे
आ रहा.
पूछा था आपकी प्रोजेक्ट लहर,
Yes.
वो भी
हाँ,
बहुत लंबा
that
आपने
was
आंसर
longish.
दिया. ठीक है.
So it actually happens that whenever the interview starts, I think I speak for a longer while, and then as it actually takes
So
place, my answers get
I think
shorter.
I had to stop you somewhere,
Yes, sir.
right?
In a
So
couple of questions.
that is an indication that you were speaking.
Yes.
तो कोशिश करिए, प्रैक्टिस करिए, अपने सवालों का सवाल बनाइए और रिप्लाईज बनाइए.
Yes.
ऑलराइट, बुलेट पॉइंट में उनको याद करने की कोशिश करिए. आई डेंट आस्क यू कपल ऑफ क्वेश्चंस. वोका इफेक्ट ऑन इंडियन इकोनॉमी, which you should know, and what is helicopter money and for what this term is being used. This was due to shortage of time. And international affairs, member rightly mentioned, Africa is very important these days.
Yes.
And obviously NATO and allied issues.
Yes.
And diplomacy. Read definition of diplomacy. Learn answer on my question is, can diplomacy alone stop a war?
Yes.
So that's it, Vidushi.
Yes.
अपने नाम को आपने सार्थक बनाना है. We wish to see you on top of the list.
Thank you so
Wish you all
much.
the